The bank told me that they could not release my deceased mother's savings because the account holder must be present, so I brought her ashes to the counter. My mother worked at the same dry cleaning shop for 29 years. She started when she was 29 and never left. She pressed shirts, treated stains, tagged orders, ran the register, and locked up 5 nights a week for nearly 3 decades. Her hands were rough from steam and chemicals, and she had a permanent mark on her right thumb from the tagging gun. She never made more than $14 an hour. Despite that, she saved. Every single paycheck, she put something aside. $10, $20, sometimes $50 if she picked up a weekend shift. She kept her savings in one account at a branch 2 blocks from our apartment. She'd walk there on the first of every month, deposit whatever she'd set aside, and walk home. She never used the ATM. She didn't trust them. She wanted to hand the money to a person and watch the person stamp the slip and hand the slip back to her, so she had something physical to fold into her wallet. Mom got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer at 58, 8 weeks between the diagnosis and the end. She told me during the second week that she had $6,300 in her savings account, and she wanted me to use it to cover whatever the insurance didn't pay. She said if there was anything left over, I should use it to take time off because I looked tired. That was my mother, dying of cancer and worried I looked tired. She passed on a Thursday morning. I held her hand and told her she did a good job. The funeral was small, 12 people. Her boss closed the shop for the afternoon and brought flowers. 2 weeks after the funeral, I went to the bank, same branch she'd walked to every month for 29 years. I brought the death certificate, her will, my ID, and the account number she'd written on a piece of notebook paper and taped inside her cupboard. I waited in line for 25 minutes. When I got to the counter, I explained the situation to the teller. Young guy, maybe 23, name tag said Brendan. I told him my mother had passed and I needed to access her savings account as the named beneficiary. He typed for a while, looked at his screen, then told me the account holder needed to be present for any withdrawal or transfer. I told him the account holder was deceased. That's why I had a death certificate. He looked at the death certificate, looked at his screen, and said the system required the account holder to authorize the release in person, and he couldn't override it. I asked to speak to someone else. He went to the back and returned with a woman named Renee, who introduced herself as the branch manager. Renee sat down across from me at her desk, reviewed my documents, and told me the same thing using longer words. She said the account had a security hold that required in-person verification from the account holder, and until that hold was cleared, the funds could not be released. I told her the account holder was my mother, and she was dead. Renee said she understood that, but the system didn't have a pathway to process the release without the account holder's presence. She recommended I contact their estate services line. I asked how long that would take. She said 8 to 12 weeks. I called the estate services number the next day. I was on hold for an hour and 40 minutes. The representative told me to submit the death certificate, a copy of the will, 2 forms of my own ID, a notarized affidavit of heirship, and a letter from the funeral home confirming the death. I submitted everything within a week. 6 weeks later, I received a letter saying my claim was denied because the account had been flagged for in-person verification and could not be processed remotely. The letter said I should visit the branch and resolve the hold with the account holder present. The letter was addressed to me. The person sending it knew my mother was dead because the entire claim was based on her death certificate. I called the estate line again, another 90 minutes on hold. The representative said she could see the notes on the account and understood the situation, but the hold could only be lifted at the branch level. She suggested I go back to the branch. I went back the following Tuesday. Renee was at her desk. She recognized me and gave me a polite smile. I sat down and told her the estate services department sent me back to her. She pulled up the account and said the same hold was still active. I placed the death certificate on her desk for the second time. She said she would escalate it to the regional office and I should expect a call within 5 business days. I did not receive a call. On the 9th day, I went to a shelf in my mother's apartment where I kept her urn, a simple brass container about the size of a coffee can. I picked it up, set it in a canvas bag, and drove to the bank. I waited in line for 20 minutes. When I reached the counter, Brendan looked up and recognized me. Before he could say anything, I placed the urn on the counter between us. I told him the account holder was present. He stared at the urn and didn't move. I told him that for 3 months his bank had told me the account holder needed to be here, so here she was. Brendan was frozen. The whole line behind me had gone quiet. I could feel every pair of eyes on the urn sitting on that counter, and I didn't care. He stepped back from the counter, turned, and walked toward the back offices. 2 minutes later, Renee came through the door behind the counter. The second her eyes landed on the brass urn sitting on the counter, her polite smile fell off her face. She came over and smoothed her jacket. "Sir," she said, keeping her voice measured, "would you mind stepping into my office so we can discuss this privately?" I looked at her. I looked at the urn. I looked at the line of people behind me. "No," I said. "Whatever needs to happen can happen right here, at this counter, in front of everyone." Renee leaned in and dropped her voice low. "Sir, bringing human remains into a place of business is inappropriate. If you refuse to cooperate, I will have no choice but to call security." I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at her and said, "I have been cooperating for 3 months. I cooperated when your teller told me to come back with more paperwork. I cooperated when you told me to call estate services. I cooperated when I spent 90 minutes on hold, twice, and submitted every document you asked for. And cooperation got me a denied claim and a form letter telling a dead woman to come back and verify her own identity." Renee opened her mouth and then closed it. Behind me, a voice came from the line. An older woman, maybe in her 60s, gray hair pinned back, holding her purse in both hands. "Excuse me," she said, loud enough for the whole lobby to hear. "I've been banking at this branch for 15 years, and I think what you're doing to this man is shameful." Renee's head turned toward her. "Ma'am, this is a private matter between the bank and our customer. It stopped being private when you made him beg for his own mother's money," the woman said. Renee took a breath. "I understand this is frustrating," she said, turning back to me, "but I do not have the authority to override a system hold at the branch level." That was when I decided I was done listening. I reached into the canvas bag and pulled out a folder. Every single piece of paper I'd submitted. The death certificate, my mother's will, my driver's license, the notarized affidavit of heirship, the letter from the funeral home, and at the bottom, the denial letter. I spread them across the counter. I fanned them out like a hand of cards so Renee and Brendan and anyone else could see all of them at once. I looked at Renee and said, which one of these is not enough? Tell me right now, which document is missing? She looked at the papers for a long time. She didn't answer, because there was no answer. The only thing missing was a living, breathing person who had been dead for 3 months. Renee straightened up. I'm going to call the regional office right now. Will you please wait in the lobby while I make that call? I picked up the urn. I walked over to the row of chairs near the front window. I sat down and set the urn on the seat right next to me, like it was a person. My mother always hated waiting in banks, I said out loud. At least this time she has a seat. I sat there for 40 minutes. Renee was in her office the whole time. When she came out, she sat down in the chair directly across from me, not behind her desk, right there in the lobby. I spoke with the regional compliance office, she said. The hold on your mother's account is tied to a verification protocol that was put in place when the account was originally opened. According to the records, your mother agreed to it. It requires a signature and a photo ID match, done in person at the branch. Without that verification, the funds cannot move. 29 years ago, my mother walked into this branch, probably nervous, and someone handed her a form and told her to sign here and here and here. She signed because she trusted them. And now that same signature was the thing keeping me from her $6,300. I don't have the system access to override the hold, Renee said. I requested an override from the regional office. They told me the override request needs to go through estate services. She had just described the same circle. Regional says go to estate services. Estate services says go to the branch. The branch says go to regional. I stood up. I picked up the urn and held it in the crook of my arm. I'm not leaving, I said. I am going to sit in this lobby every single day this branch is open, until someone who has the authority to fix this walks through that front door and does their job. Renee looked at the urn in my arms. She stood up, picked up her notepad, and walked back toward her office. She closed the door. I came back the next morning. The branch opened at 9 a.m., and I was standing outside the glass doors at 8:57 watching the employees move around inside getting ready. When the lock clicked open, I walked straight to the same chair I'd sat in the day before. I set the urn on the seat next to me, the same way I had before. Brendan was already behind the counter. He looked up when I walked in and our eyes met for just a second. He didn't say a word. He just looked back down at his computer. I'd brought a book this time. One of those paperbacks you grab from a shelf without really thinking about it. I didn't read much of it, but it gave my hands something to do. I also brought a sandwich wrapped in plastic. I wasn't trying to make a scene. I was just there, present, the same way they'd been asking my mother to be for 3 months. By noon, Renee had come out of her office twice to look at me and then walked back in. 2 other customers came up to me during that time and asked if I was okay. I told them the short version. Both of them shook their heads. One of them, a guy in a work shirt with paint on his jeans, said he was closing his account after seeing this. Around 2:30, my phone rang. Donaldson. He had been my mother's neighbor for 30 years. He used to bring her soup when she was sick. He was calling about some mail of hers that had been delivered to him by mistake. He asked what I'd been up to, so I told him. I told him everything. Donaldson was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I was there when she opened that account. I drove her to the bank that day because it was snowing. The branch manager back then walked her through every form and told her the account was simple. He told her if anything ever happened to her, her son would be able to get the money without any trouble. I sat up straighter. Are you sure? I'm sure. I was sitting right next to her. If you need someone to come down there and tell them what she was told, I'll do it. I'll come tomorrow. The next morning, I was back outside the branch at 8:55, day 3. But this time, I wasn't alone. Donaldson was 71 years old and walked with a cane, one of those plain wooden ones with a rubber tip. His voice sounded like gravel being poured out of a bucket. We walked in together. I went straight to my chair. Donaldson sat on the other side of the urn, so my mother was between us. Around 9:45, Renee came out. She saw Donaldson and slowed down. Renee, I said, this is Donaldson. He was my mother's neighbor for 30 years. He was also there the day she opened her account at this branch. Donaldson looked up at her from his chair and spoke. I drove Lizzie to this bank the day she opened that account. We sat right at that desk over there. The manager back then walked her through every single form, and he told her clear as day that if anything ever happened to her, her son would be able to come in and get the money without any trouble. Renee listened. When he finished, she said, I appreciate you sharing that, sir. But unfortunately, a verbal recollection from a third party doesn't change the system hold. Donaldson leaned forward in his chair. I have been banking at this branch for 30 years, he said, and his voice was louder now, not shouting, but not trying to keep things private either. 30 years. And I want to know what kind of institution traps a dead woman's money and then tells her son to bring her back from the grave to come get it. People looked up. The whole lobby heard it. Renee straightened up. I stepped in. Renee, I want a name. I want the name and the direct phone number of whoever at the regional level has the authority to override this hold. I can't give out internal contact information. Fine. Then call them right now. Put them on speaker. Right here. She shook her head slowly. That's not standard procedure. Standard procedure was the reason I was here in the first place. Donaldson stood up slowly. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling Gustav, Donaldson said. Gustav Roy was a retired compliance officer who'd spent most of his career working in banking regulation. He'd helped Donaldson sort out some issues with his own accounts a few years back. He understood how these systems worked from the inside out and what they were allowed to do and what they were choosing not to. Donaldson held the phone to his ear. Gustav, it's Donaldson. I need you to listen. He told him everything. He told it fast and flat and honest. Then he said, that's what I thought. He looked over at me. Gustav says he'll come to the branch tomorrow morning. He says don't leave this lobby. That night I sat in my mother's apartment and held the urn in my lap. I talked to her the way I used to when she was alive, just quiet words in an empty room. I told her I was sorry it was taking so long. I told her the money didn't even matter to me anymore. What mattered was that she spent 29 years walking to that bank, trusting it with every dollar she saved, and they couldn't even give her son the dignity of a straight answer. Gustav was coming. He knew the system. He knew the language. Gustav walked through the front door at 9:15. He was in his 70s, tall, with the kind of posture that told you he'd spent decades in rooms where posture mattered. He was carrying a leather folder under his arm. He came straight to me and shook my hand. Then he sat down next to Donaldson and said, where's the branch manager? I knocked on Renee's office door. She came out. Gustav stood when she approached. He extended his hand. My name is Gustav Roy. I spent 26 years as a compliance officer with the Federal Banking regulatory authority. I retired 8 years ago. I'm not here in any official capacity today. I'm here as a friend of this family. Renee stood a little straighter. How can I help you, Mr. Roy? Gustav sat back down and opened his leather folder. Inside were several printed pages, clean and organized, each one with sections highlighted in yellow marker. He pulled out the top sheet. This is your bank's own account agreement, current version. I printed it from your public website last night. He turned the page so it faced her and pointed to a highlighted section. Section 9, subsection C. It states that accounts with a named beneficiary are subject to expedited transfer upon presentation of a valid death certificate and proof of beneficiary status. He looked up at Renee. This young man has a valid death certificate. He has a will naming him as beneficiary.